Welcome, everyone. My name is Michael Williams. I'll be presenting today with my colleague, Tim Hulse. I'm from the Science of PCVE, Research Evaluation and Research and Evaluation firm dedicated to preventing and countering violent extremism and disinformation. We're here today to talk about the evaluation of the Mayor of London's Shared Endeavour Fund. More specifically, we'll be talking about what is the Mayor of London's Shared Endeavour Fund overall. More specifically, how to evaluate prevention funds in general. And then we'll be talking about our evaluation approach and methods, and we'll be talking about lessons learned. And before we get into this, I just would like to mention that this is especially for you. If you are here, if you're someone who is a program manager, a policymaker, someone who's interested in evaluating multiple programs and wanting to know, are these multiple programs working in the aggregate? And with that, I'm going to hand this over to my colleague, Tim Hulse, who will speak about the Mayor of London's Shared Endeavour Fund overall. Tim?
Hey, everybody. Thank you for passing over, Michael. Yeah, so before we sort of get started about talking about our specific evaluation approach for the Shared Endeavour Fund, I'm just going to give you a little bit of general background about the fund itself, which Michael and I have had the privilege of working on. Next slide, please, Michael. Right. So the Shared Endeavour Fund was created in 2019 by the Greater London Authority. And the reason for that was that in early 2019, the GLA conducted some London-wide mapping research to identify areas of action that they would need to take in order to support the Mayor of London's counter-extremism objectives. And running through this very long report is a need to empower civil society organizations to begin addressing or preventing extremism in order to sort of leverage the unique capabilities that they have in this area and the connections that they have with communities and the trust that they have. As a result, in 2020, the Mayor of London launched the Shared Endeavour Fund as a prevention funding scheme for civil society organizations. Next point, please, Michael. And the next one as well, actually. The goal of the Shared Endeavour Fund is to support initiatives that build Londoners' resilience to radicalization and extremist recruitment, and to reduce racism, intolerance, hate, and extremism in the capital. So it's quite a broad remit they have, from very sort of upstream programming all the way to like quite downstream CVE programming. The fund itself is managed by MOPAC, which is the Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime. It's administered by Groundwork London, and it's, of course, evaluated by Michael and myself. Next slide, please. So the Shared Endeavour Fund's been running for about 3 years now. Call 1 was 2020, as I said, and it reached it gave out £800,000 worth of grants to 31 projects, reaching over 28,000 Londoners. And due to the success of Call 1, the Mayor of London decided to renew the fund for a second round in late 2021. These funding rounds go for about 7 to 9 months, depending on the round. As you can see, we have just finished Call 3 of the Shared Endeavour Fund, so the third round of this fund. And our evaluation, which is forthcoming, I believe, just after Christmas in the new year. MOPAC will be releasing that. So we've only got the first and second one available thus far. Simultaneously, we've now entered Call 4. So as of September 2023, the Shared Endeavour Fund entered its fourth call, and projects are currently in delivery as we speak, with the expectation that they should be finished about midway through next year. So it's been quite a few rounds of this now, and it's been, the Mayor's been very supportive of it, and it's been going quite well. And I believe that they plan to continue expanding this for future years. Next slide, please. So the Shared Endeavour Fund has 4 priority themes that we have had we've been able to have quite a role in helping MOPAC to formulate. And these 4 objectives or funding priorities are first, as you can see, to raise awareness. So this is kind of supporting primary and primordial prevention programming in London. And it deals largely with increasing Londoners' understanding of intolerance, hate, and extremism, its impact on communities, and most importantly, to recognize and manage the risks that they face online and offline. The second priority theme for the fund is building psychosocial resilience. So this is your classic secondary prevention programming. But in the case of the Shared Endeavour Fund, it deals very specifically with psychosocial resilience factors here, as opposed to sort of, more concrete factors like opportunities or wealth or whatever. And we're really dealing here with things like, building tolerance, building perspective taking, sense of belonging, sense of meaning. These are sort of very much psychological factors. Third is promoting pro-social behaviors. And this is to encourage Londoners to sort of safely and effectively challenge any extremist attitudes or behaviors they might encounter. So the outcomes we're looking at here is kind of, reporting hate incidents and hate crimes, whether that's online or offline, reporting suspected cases of radicalization, and then very importantly, bystander interventions, which I'm sure many of you have worked on before. The last of the priority themes is strengthening prevention capabilities. So unlike the others, which is very, a general public or vulnerable individuals and groups, the fourth deals with frontline practitioners with a specific focus, or historically a specific focus on teacher training. And this is, building these prevention capacities so that they can engage and conduct their own activities either in their classrooms or in local communities. So that's sort of a bit of a background about the Shared Endeavour Fund itself. Before we move on to our specific evaluation approach, which Michael will tell you all about, we wanted to give a bit of background about evaluating prevention funds more broadly, because obviously a prevention fund is actually quite different than most other types of project that one might conduct or evaluation that one might conduct. And I think some of what we're going to talk about here we've tried to focus it on prevention funds, but it really applies to all civil society funding schemes, to be honest. Next slide, please, Mark. So unlike a normal evaluation or a normal project, funding schemes tend to have three levels in which sort of activities are conducted, and therefore in which evaluations need to focus. They can have more than three levels, they can have less, but as a general rule, we tend to find that there's three levels. So the sort of most primal level of that, or the most essential, is this project level. Can you do next slide twice, please, Mark? Yeah, and evaluation here is focused on two main things. So monitoring project fidelity. So this is, your classic process evaluation kind of stuff. Are projects doing what they said that they would do? Not the most glamorous, but obviously, this output information is something that just has to be collected and we all have to know about. The second is assessing project results. So this is your outcome evaluation. And in most sort of civil society funding schemes, this tends to be projects evaluating and reporting on their own results with some level of support from fund managers, which can be, very sort of cursory supervision, all the way up to sort of like one-to-one, very in-depth support. With civil society schemes, particularly those like the Shared Endeavour Fund, which focus on grassroots implementers, this obviously does have the challenge that many of these implementers may not have the evaluation expertise that you would ideally like them to. Second level of a funding scheme, and thus an evaluation, focuses on the grantee. It's been our finding that, and we've worked on a few prevention funds now between us. It's been our finding that most of these funds tend to have some form of, or some element of formal or informal capacity building, whether that's, external mentoring and training, or more often some form of peer-to-peer learning and networking that's facilitated through the fund. Can you do next slide, please, Mark? So here, M&E is obviously going to have to focus on monitoring the outputs of any training activities, and if a critical mass has been reached, evaluating sort of any changes in organizational capacity as a result of involvement in said fund. The third level, and obviously the most important, is the fund itself. Next ones, please. So the first part of that is obviously monitoring fund management. So we're looking here at, the application process, the project selection process, reporting processes, fund communications, all your very standard process evaluation kind of things, but this time focused at the fund level. The second is obviously your outcome impact evaluation. Now, I would generally say that there is roughly sort of 4 approaches that I have seen for assessing collective results across funds. The first of those tends to be where a fund will collect evidence itself from local communities, or secondly, we'll use third-party data. So that might be, UN reporting data, national government data, etc. These tend to be much more popular in funding schemes which focus on something which is either thematically or geographically quite confined, and tends to be more popular when there's a belief that the funding scheme has had enough time to reach a critical mass where you could see changes at a population level, as opposed to just among project beneficiaries. More common is the third and fourth approach, which is either case studies, so selecting some of the projects from within the fund to really focus on, either through an external evaluation or some other methodology, or aggregating or summarizing results from projects within the portfolio. And these tend to be, these latter approaches tend to be the most common. Next 2 more times, please. The next one is obviously comparing project level results. So it's obviously very important that in order to make good funding decisions, you need to have an idea of how projects are doing and how they're doing relative to each other. And obviously that's because we know that a big goal of all funds is sort of to promote the best performing projects, support the middle performing projects, and remove the bottom third, as it were, to make room for new ideas and new initiatives. We've also found, and this is obviously not an obligation, but we often find that funds are in a really good position, perhaps a unique position, to collate and disseminate learnings because they are in contact with so many initiatives, particularly in a prevention space. They have a great opportunity to do this. Next slide, then over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Tim. Now we're going to talk about challenges for this type of fund level evaluation. So imagine if you are the mayor of a city, or you're a policymaker within your government, and you have to decide, look at the road ahead if you're trying to evaluate your entire fund. And when we say fund, we're also, another term we've heard used is portfolio. So you have a portfolio of programs, and you're going to need to report to your constituents, to your superiors, to perhaps even the media. Is your portfolio of programs, quote unquote, working? So this is the road ahead that you have to look forward to. Spoiler alert, there are those of us available to help you with this. But this is some of the challenges you're going to face. First of all, M&E needs to be carried out at multiple levels, the 3 levels that Tim just mentioned, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, etc. But basically the 3 levels that we just covered. And it needs to be carried out at the onset, because if you're going to have multiple programs engaging in M&E, they need to know what's expected of them from the get-go. And if you're going to be planning to measure project fidelity, in other words, are projects doing what they say they are going to do, we need to have all of that established upfront, unlike some evaluations where you can, to some extent, build the M&E tools while you're flying the aircraft, so to speak. Sometimes you can do that. In fact, some evaluations you can just use archival data and in fact evaluate a program even after it's completed, though that's not recommended. And especially, again, if we're at the level of evaluating an entire portfolio, an entire fund, we really need to have our M&E framework established to the nth degree up front. So next part is, this is a bit of a challenge, isn't it? Because other than designing a valid research method, think about your multiple grantees. How are they going to collect data? Many of these institutions, many of these grantees don't have evaluation expertise. We wouldn't expect them to. They're not social scientists, okay? So how are we going to collect data from them? How are we going to empower them to give us the information that we need to be able to make policy relevant decisions? And guess what? There's almost no literature on evaluating funding schemes, much less on evaluating funding schemes in the field of preventing and countering violent extremism. So it's not that you can just go to your local library and pick up the book on how to do this. Okay, but spoiler alert, again, we are here to help you with any and all of these steps. And in fact, let's talk about some of our evaluation approaches and methods that we performed with the Mayor of London and the Mayor's Office of Policing. Okay, first of all, we measured project fidelity. Now, fidelity is separate from measuring impact per se. Fidelity is, did the programs basically accomplish what they set out to do programmatically? Let's speak more concretely about this. We used a rubric, a predetermined rubric, to be able to rate grantees on a 3-point criteria, basically at the risk of oversimplifying it, very good, not good, or somewhere in between. Of course, we operationalized all of this, but to keep it simple, a 3-point criteria. First of all, consistency with their planned outputs. In other words, we only held grantees responsible for what they said they were going to do. We didn't hold the bar any higher than what they stated that they would accomplish based on their project applications. And so one of these is project reach. So quite simply, did they reach the number of beneficiaries that they said that they were going to? Did they reach the type of beneficiaries, the geographic or socio-demographics that they intended? And that leads to beneficiary targeting and selection. And third is sampling and data collection. What we did from a sampling perspective is we did not expect grantees to collect a census of data. In other words, we did not expect them to put a survey in the faces of every single one of their beneficiaries. We know that organizations have limited capacity for M&E. And so it would be just totally onerous in our view to expect these grantees to collect data from everyone who walks through their doors, so to speak. Some of these beneficiaries, their projects involve, say, giving a presentation to an auditorium full of students. It's unrealistic to survey every one of them. And so what we did is a statistical power calculation for every grantee. And in this case, there were 19 grantees. And so we looked at their proposal. They stated they would reach X number of participants. And then we said, okay, if that's the case, we told them then what is the sample size that we need them to collect so that we can do our calculations and achieve an estimated, with an estimated 5% margin of error, no more than that. So we set the bar reasonably low, that is a sample of participants, but reasonably high that we could have confidence in our findings, again, a 5% margin of error. Now we come to project effectiveness. And this is normally where people's mind goes first when talking about, does it work? Are we working with PCVE? But let's just pause a moment to respect project fidelity, because this is central. How many times have you seen evaluations that, oftentimes evaluation report says, yes, we succeeded, etc. But did the projects morph? Did they somehow compromise their standards? Oftentimes this is not reported. And so we really need to respect this component. And we're really proud that we, again, did so with a rating rubric. We did not just stand there, sit around a table, drinking coffee and asking ourselves, what's your opinion of this? No, we had an operationalized 3-point criteria for each of these 3 bullets, which you see on the screen right now. So we tried to make it as replicable. In other words, if we had another set of evaluators come in and use the same rubric to evaluate fidelity, they would come to substantively similar conclusions. In fact, we even calculated something. I'm going to get a little nerdy here. Excuse me. This is the bow tie speaking. That we even calculated the so-called intra-class correlation coefficient, the ICC. We know mathematically that in this present case, my co-evaluator Tim Hulse and I, we agreed above 0.71, which is the minimum level of acceptance for concurrence using a rubric of this type. So we know mathematically, we have confidence that this rubric is valid and replicable. We're all about replicability. As Tim mentioned, we're now entering our 4th year of this type of approach, and it's been hugely successful. And part of it is because we use a highly replicable method. And again, just to wink at everyone on this call, if you want to increase the replicability of your evaluations, please let us know, because we can help you. So let's get into what most people want to know about project effectiveness. And guess what? The actual evaluation results, yes, you can learn about in the forthcoming report. And yes, they passed with flying colors. It was a huge success again. But today's discussion is not about, did the Mayor of London's Shared Endeavour Fund succeed in its outcomes at the project level? Again, yes, they did. But more importantly, we're talking about the evaluation approach. Was the evaluation approach successful? And I'm happy to say that, yes, we're just thrilled with it. we wouldn't be speaking to you today probably if that wasn't the case. So the evaluation focused in terms of the effectiveness on assessing prevention-related outcomes, as Tim mentioned, at both the project and fund levels. And how did we do that? Grantees were equipped with surveys that they could administer to their participants, that they were required to administer to their participants, to the sample that I just mentioned. And we used a retrospective pre-post survey design that assessed changes in beneficiaries' knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors. We'll be talking a little bit more about this later. But a retrospective pre-post survey, it's essentially a pre-post test, whether to assess change as a result of the program. And we can talk about what specifically a retrospective pre-post design is if you want, but I don't want to get into those details right now. What are these surveys that we equipped grantees with? It was we had a suite of 17 peer-reviewed or otherwise validated survey instruments. Think of it as a menu of possible survey instruments that a given grantee could be allotted, that they'd be required to collect data from their sample of participants. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. And the beauty of having this common suite of 17 measures is that it allows us to aggregate the findings because we're only using those measures. Grantees were allowed, of course, to have additional measurement and evaluation methods in place, but this was considered the bare minimum. And that way we can aggregate findings from any programs that completed a given survey instrument. So let's speak a little bit more concretely about this. The measurable outcomes. As Tim mentioned, we had 4 strategic priorities, strategic objectives. These were not ours. These were not Tim's and mine. These were from the Mayor of London, from the Mayor's Office of Policing as well. Again, that was raising awareness, building psychosocial resilience, strengthening prevention capabilities, and promoting pro-social behaviors. Grantees who were awarded funding had to describe explicitly in their proposals how their programming addressed one or more of these 4 domains. Why would we fund them if their programming wasn't strategically relevant? Okay, so if, for example, a program mentioned that it was raising awareness, if its purpose was to raise awareness, then, as you can see here, we had 3 possible measures which we could parcel out to them. One about that measures changes in awareness and recognition of a given social problem. Also, message inoculation. This is especially relevant towards countering misinformation and disinformation. We have a bespoke tool for measuring that based on the empirical literature about message inoculation. Some programs were focused on digital literacy, helping particularly young people be more savvy consumers of online information. So for example, then, if a program was stating that they were raising awareness, we had meetings with each of the grantees where we came to consensus that which of these 3 measures would be applicable to their programming. Likewise, for building psychosocial resilience, as you can see, we have a host of menu options: building emotional resilience, building a sense of meaning and purpose in life, improving self-esteem, and sense of belonging, improving their ability for perspective taking, and increasing their tolerance for difference. All of these have theoretical linkages in the peer-reviewed scholarship of preventing and countering violent extremism, that each of these factors may have a role to play as protective factors. And so, again, if a program stated that they were building psychosocial resilience, again, we're not holding them to any other standard than by what they are asserting in their applications, then we would drill down and ask, okay, which of these menu options amongst the building psychosocial resilience are applicable to their programming? And again, this was a consensus process. We did not force feed anybody a measure. It was very much us working in tandem with the grantees, a bit time consuming, and hats off to my colleague Tim Hulse, who really spearheaded that part of the evaluation. But at the end of the day, across these 19 programs, again, 19 grantees, we now have these common measures, these 17 measures. That way, any of the programming that was, for example, focused on, I'm here looking at building psychosocial resilience, any of them that were, let's say, working on increasing tolerance of difference, now we can actually aggregate their findings because all of those grantees focused on that used the same survey measure. Hence our name for these. We call these the common measures. And I know I'm spending a lot of time on this slide, and there's no That's no accident. This was really the fireworks of this evaluation approach. Never before done in the world of preventing and countering violent extremism was a common menu, a common rubric, a common suite of survey measures used across multiple grantees. We literally could compare apples to apples across these 19 grantees. Now, let's go further. Let's just say, again, you're the mayor of your town. You might even be the president or a governor. And you need to find out if what you're doing as a policy is working, so to speak. Okay. So let's just say one of your constituents asked you this. They said, okay, is your program increasing beneficiaries' tolerance for difference and diversity? What are you going to say to that? Are you going to just say, well, we think so, or we ran some focus groups, or we did some, exit interviewing, or some arguably less rigorous form of data collection. Let's just say that. No, instead, thanks to our survey measures, one of which in this case was measuring tolerance. We used we pulled from the scholarly literature. I'll show you the citation. A measure that's been previously used in research for measuring changes in tolerance and difference. And we able to show that at pretest, beneficiaries were scoring about 59%. On a scale from 0 to 100, 59% on their pretest score. How tolerant were they of others, people with different views, different lifestyles than they? And at post score, they were at 76%. So simple math is that's a change of 17%. So, and thanks to the robust sample size, we're actually able to calculate a very tidy margin of error, just a margin of error of just 2.9%. And due to per the conventions of the social sciences, this is an effect size statistic known as partial eta squared, and that's 0.37, which by convention is a very large effect size. So how convenient is it that at the policy level, at the program level, the mayor of London can say unequivocally to his or her, whoever is going to be in office, constituents, that yes, we improved, according to these surveys, improved tolerance for difference by 17%. It's tidy, it's clean, it's accurate, it's replicable, it's defensible. We're just so happy and proud of this approach because it really, it facilitates this discussion and allows us to move on, and it allows us to compare year to year because again, it's replicable. So, okay, is 17% good? I mean, per the effect size conventions, yes, it's a large effect size. We're actually very, very pleased with this. But how does it compare to last year? How does it compare to next year? Can we see a trend? Are we doing consistently well in this? Can we do better? Let's see how much better we can do, for example. So this allows us to have this cross-year comparison. It's just really there. We would not do it any other way. Let me just put it this way. We're so pleased with the results. Obviously, the Mayor of London is pleased with the results. The Mayor's Office of Policing as well. We're now in our 4th year using this approach. And again, if you should want these slides, this is the reference for where we got our tolerance of difference scale from the peer-reviewed literature. Now, you've listened to me talk long enough. Let me hand back to my colleague, Tim Hulse, who will talk about lessons learned. Tim?
Thanks, Michael. So that's sort of our evaluation approach for the Shared Endeavour Fund. And I'm just going to run through some of the sort of big lessons that we've learned from this process. The first one, build strong partnerships between fund managers and evaluators. This is obviously on one level the most boring lesson learned that we could see. It's blindingly obvious from the get-go. It is also probably the most important, just in the sense that if you have these strong relationships, it ensures that our findings are relevant and useful. It facilitates this sort of rapid evidence-based decision-making by the fund, and it really streamlines any learning uptake. We sit on the moderation panel for grant applications, and we can support with all of these processes every year. And it's because we have these relationships with fund managers. If something goes wrong midway through the project, we know about it almost instantly. And as a result, I think MOPAC has successfully managed to, or has managed to, put in place every one of our recommendations every year very quickly, just because we have this strong relationship where it becomes a lot more collaborative, rather than just being something that you either do to, tick a box, or is done at the end, but is never really employed in any meaningful sense. I mean, it's, I suppose from an evaluation standpoint, we call it utilization-focused evaluation. But for MOPAC and the Mayor of London, it's just a great way of making sure that what they're doing is working and that they can continue to improve. Second one is about sharing the fund's theory of change. So I think it's really important. This is one of the biggest things we found, is that you involve evaluation in the design of the fund itself, particularly the application and reporting processes, but also in the sort of prospectus that you share with grantees. And in this case, our key lesson being share the fund's theory of change with your grantees before they even apply. And this is so important because if applicants know what you want them to do, then the project applications you will receive will ultimately be much more relevant. We did not do this in the first round of the fund, and we did it in every subsequent round. And the relevance of applications has just improved massively. It also helps with, and this is I have found, and I think most people would agree, the most difficult part of P/CVE, in that if you've got a good theory of change, it will say a lot about the types of beneficiaries you expect projects to target. And we often find, I think, as most people would, that it's actually almost easier to create a good project than it is to find people who are genuinely in need or genuinely vulnerable. And if you can at least give some guidance in this area to your grantees before they become grantees, or your applicants, it's just going to make a world of difference, so that you're not worrying about these things once they've already been contracted. And lastly, if you're working with grassroots implementers, then promoting that shared understanding and shared, terminology around what's going on, what you expect to see, just makes everything a lot easier, particularly where some of that CVE expertise may not be entirely there. Third point, yes, employing shared data collection tools. So obviously, Michael has spoken quite a lot about this. I'm not going to, repeat in large sort of sense what he's said, but I would just say that, if your goal is to run an evidence-based fund that supports grassroots implementers, then you are going to probably need some form of standardized data collection process. And that's because even when their projects are good, a grassroots implementer is often just not going to have the evaluation expertise necessary to give you the type of information that you need to pursue a results-based management approach and to sort of make evidence-based decisions. It would be equally valid to say that conjuring, comparable or let alone aggerable data from a portfolio is incredibly difficult to do without that sort of process. If you're just relying on everyone's independent reporting, apart from outputs, it can be very difficult to compare the outcomes that they've achieved, almost impossible in most cases. Having a standardized common process really manages to mitigate this issue and does just make it a lot easier to describe not just what the fund is doing, but also to compare the projects within it. It's also worth noting that case-based approaches, which is something that we actually did try in call one of the Endeavour fund. So our first call was a case-based approach, and it was successful. We had great information on the 5 projects that we selected, very rich picture, very in-depth. And if you're sort of promoting an innovation fund model approach, that can be definitely really useful. The difficulty becomes what you do with the other 3/4 of projects that were not selected as case studies. Where these organizations are a bit larger, a bit more established, they can probably evaluate their own stuff. But a lot of the time, they're not going to be able to. And I think in call 1, our evaluation found that I believe it was 45% of the projects did not provide any usable information in support of their outcomes. Even though we were very confident from observing that some of them were doing an excellent job. Many of these projects just had no information. It was maybe 2 quotes from a happy beneficiary to support all of their outcomes. And at that level, that's obviously just not an acceptable thing to be pursuing with. And finally, next slide, please, Michael. Finally, use evaluation processes to empower civil society organizations. As I said, sort of at the top of this, it's been our finding that most prevention funding schemes, and to be honest, most civil society funding schemes, have this underlying objective of empowering civil society to engage in whatever thematic area you're doing, in our case, prevention. And if you want to do that, evaluation can be such a useful means of facilitating this process. One, because, ongoing support that can be offered will increase their thematic and evaluation capacity or expertise over time. 2, because it will give them much better it'll improve their project delivery and results by just giving them an idea of what they're doing that's been successful, what's been less successful, how to better, frame and target their programming. And I think actually most importantly, and perhaps certainly most surprisingly for us, was the role that it plays in helping grantees to secure additional funding. Because obviously, while it's important that these funds will help grantees, we obviously want them to secure additional funding and continue to do this. If that's our ultimate objective is obviously not to fund organizations, it's to get them engaging in an area or a field. And giving them evaluation data, which they can use in project applications, has just been so useful for this. This is why every year we produce a series of sort of glossy A3 page spreads on each of the projects that list, their outputs, a description, their results. And this just makes such a big difference, not to us so much, but to them, in that it really helps them to find new funding. And we've had a lot of organizations that we've worked with through the Endeavour Fund I know one that have tripled in size over the last 3 years, another one which has gone from, one small project in one borough to being pan-London. The impact that has on the organizations just really cannot be overstated. And as a result, the impact that has on prevention in your area, whether that's a city or a country, also just cannot be overstated. And I think those are our sort of 4 key lessons learned. Michael, over to you.
Well, with that, we want to thank everyone who's been on this call. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, fantastic. We are here to help. There is going to be a Q&A session in just a moment, but just know that we are here not just today, but tomorrow and hopefully forever. These are our email addresses, and you can feel free to contact us anytime or visit us anytime that you'd like at thescienceofpeacecve.org. And with that, we will now look towards questions. And again, thank you everyone for your time. We're very glad to be here with you.
Hi, Michael and Tim. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can. Hello, sir.
Oh, hi. Thank you so very much for your presentation. That was really fascinating. My name is Arif Saha. I'm based at Sheikh Halam University, where I work on this project. And then I'm sure you have got a very good overview of the project and what it tries to seek and achieve. So, Tim and Michael, thank you so very much for the presentation. Too much of a stuff to learn and to take away for today. So it has been brilliant. And also the findings, the methodology, and also the overall evaluation concept seemed very robust, very comprehensive. So very well done on that. There are a couple of questions that I would like you to address. Perhaps I might have missed them somehow. If that's the case, then I apologize in advance. So first of all, when we talk about evaluations, particularly in PVE, CV, and de-radicalization, or let's say crime prevention domains, because the area is quite sensitive and it is quite securitized as well, and it is increasingly becoming securitized due to too many factors. So funding obviously is always the chief problem. When we talk about this funding deficit, is it purely financial and economic, or no, there are other elements associated with it and having an impact on it, such as political, cultural, social? And what are these factors that impact funding? And how do you think we can overcome this funding gap or funding deficit in order to kind of focus our attention towards other areas rather than keep talking and keep worrying about the funding of evaluation of any particular project? That's the first question, and then I've got a couple of more to follow.
So let's take that question before we move on. Thank you very much, Arif. If I'm understanding the question is, with any type of, say, crime prevention funding or program, is it all about economic viability, or are there other important factors? Am I hearing the question correctly?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, Michael, that's a question.
Tim, if you don't mind, I'll respond first to that. Once upon a time, I worked for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security also. And there, it was often made the case that what can be done at a governmental level is often what we would call a public good. So in other words, if it's not the government's responsibility to try to, say, prevent and counter violent extremism, I mean, philosophically speaking, protection of the people is arguably the foremost responsibility of the government is the protection of the people. And so therefore, it has a cost. We have militaries, etc. And so let's just use that example. We don't ask the military, military, are you financially viable? No, it's not. It's a cost. Okay. And so I think what Tim highlighted is we are absolutely delighted that this has in fact empowered these grassroots organizations to prosper and to be independent, to be self-sustaining. That should absolutely be one of the goals that we try to attain. But I would make the argument that even if that was an abject failure, that doesn't mean that the aims of the fund are not worthy. In the name of protecting all of ourselves, we would say that it's money well spent. And as Tim went over those budgets for the Shared Endeavour Fund, maybe this is the American speaking, okay, but 800,000 pounds, that's not a lot of money. Okay, so I would argue that this is a highly cost effective. I haven't done a cost benefit analysis, certainly, but I mean, just speaking, in military terms, even $1 million is like rounding error, So we're talking about very little amount of money in terms of promoting civil society amongst the populace. And with that, I'll pivot to Tim. Would you like to add anything to this?
No, I think that covered everything I would have said, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very comprehensive. So particularly the area that you talk about empowering the let's say the very local organizations to be independent. I think that is really, really significant. That kind of reduces this sort of dependency. And also, I think there's a culture of that as well. In order to uproot that culture, it is really significant to empower the local organizations. Thank you for that. I think that is really significant.
And perhaps, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just because this is more of a conversation at this time, empowerment of the grassroots organizations, that is absolutely a given. Like, we really, as the saying goes, teach someone to give someone a fish and you feed them for a day. Teach someone to fish and they can eat for a lifetime. That is independent of the economic question. So in other words, many of these organizations have been in existence prior to the Shared Endeavour Fund. So it's not that we're just giving handouts here. These organizations are wholly independent of the government. And so if we can make them more financially viable, great. But certainly we can empower them and should empower them with respect to measurement and evaluation, which is the topic of today's discussion and in fact this whole conference. So even if they weren't economically empowered, if we can empower them with respect to M&E so that they can have better, so they can see better the road that they've traveled and hopefully plan for the road ahead, which is ultimately what we're trying to help them to do, to plan and to do a better job and of course increase their accountability. Those we can always achieve. The financial question is a secondary question, but always we should be empowerment focused, I would argue. And I know I speak for Tim on that, so I don't even have to ask him in this regard. So thank you, Atif.
Oh, thank you. I think that was really useful and helpful. Thank you for that. And also, since we know evaluation is such a sensitive topic to deal with, and it also includes different actors at different levels who have got different priorities and institutional policies. When we talk about this violent extremism and also crime prevention, so there is an element of trust. Obviously, we have been talking about this idea and culture of multi-sectoral and let's say or interdisciplinary approaches and methodologies to evaluations. But I did not hear trust when you did your presentation. Is it because you didn't face this problem? It didn't exist? Is it because your approach didn't kind of involve an element of trust deficit? In case if you did face this problem of trust, how did you manage to mitigate against it?
What a wonderful question. I have perhaps a little bit to say on that, but I know Tim will have something to say about this. Tim, I'd like you to respond to this if you would.
Sure thing. I'll go first. So I think trust actually hasn't, if you're referring to sort of trust between populations, communities, and government, that very rarely becomes an issue for us, simply because I think intentionally, a large part or a large purpose of the Shared Endeavour Fund is to sort of mitigate that issue by going through, civil society and communities, which tend to have obviously not just better links, but much better trust and much better relationships with the communities that they service. So that becomes, almost a non-issue for us in many senses. If we're working with, let's say, one of our concerns, and I'm just pulling from a project from the portfolio, is digital literacy amongst Muslim communities, particularly very religious Muslim communities. If that's the concern that we have, yes, I can totally see that the government engaging in that sort of area is going to have trust-based issues. But one of the organizations that we support is, a sort of conference of imams and community leaders. They have excellent links with that community. They have excellent trust in that community. We can support them. And by extension, we're able to do that programming without having to worry directly about that trust issue. Also, thus far, trust building between sort of government or police and communities has not been a focus of the fund that has ever been pursued. So it's not something we've ever had to really deal with, just as a general rule. Though, I mean, of course, that can be quite like a specific goal and a specific problem that money funds face. Michael, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's beautifully said. Just to underscore, part of the I guess if you want to call it the brilliance of this fund is that although it is funded at the government level, truly it's carried out by local grantees, the grassroots organizations who, if they didn't already have trust or access to their beneficiaries, we wouldn't have. The Mayor of London would not have selected them for funding. So, for example, they have to make clear in their project proposals how it is that they have access or how they plan to access their beneficiaries. And we have no shortage. When I say we, I mean really the Mayor of London has no shortage of interested applicants. Tim, can you speak to, for example, in the recent rounds, how many this will tell you how many organizations are eager to engage with the government. Tim, do you recall from this last round how many applied?
80 per, and we generally fund about 20, and we have about 80 organizations, and that's
exactly.
we only fund organizations. 80, and we only fund organizations that are based in London. So that obviously limits the pool down to just one city as well. Obviously, they're not all directly, counter-extremism organizations. Some of them are, but many of them are much broader than that.
And in fact, if I can just, not to speak too much on this point, but in fact, if in their proposals, one of the rating criteria, because Tim and I have had the pleasure of helping to support even the grantee selection process, neither of us have anything to do with making the vote for who should get funded, but we have helped design the rating rubrics so that these grantees their applications can be evaluated fairly, uniformly. And one of the criteria is whether or not it's convincing whether they actually have access to the beneficiaries. Tim, can you speak more to that?
So it becomes an important question in their application process, which is obviously filtered through this. And there is a degree to which, looking at that, you need to really drill down into it more than what people are necessarily saying in their application process. Everyone claims, I think we all know that everyone claims they can access communities. That doesn't necessarily mean they can access communities. And so this is also one of those areas where, and this does come outside of our evaluation sort of lens of it, but where fund managers do need to be talking with other bodies that have these connections. So in the UK context, in the London context, that's prevent coordinators for each of the London boroughs, because they will have a good gauge of whether these organizations have the links that they say they're going to have. And to be honest, as importantly, where they can support with that. If you want to get into local schools, then going through sort of these prevent coordinators in the UK is a great way of doing that, a great way of supporting this process.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got a couple of more questions, if you don't mind, because I've been asking too many questions. I think because the presentation has inspired too many things to look at, and then obviously these questions come from presentation. So when we talk about the difference, or let's say the outcome or the impact that the project has had upon the communities. So I think it made a significant difference. Did you say that was 27%? Yeah, I think 27%. So what was your baseline for that?
Okay, yes. Anytime someone talks about the baseline is the pre-test score. Okay,
Right. Okay.
and so this is it's an important question. Oftentimes people talk about how do we baseline, how do we baseline our work, and I'm going to geek out a little bit here. We have basically speaking, there's two research designs. One is the between groups, where we compare the performance of one group with the performance of another group, typically a so-called control group, a group that did not receive the whether it's the program or the initiative, or in case of drugs, this is the group that did not receive the drug. Okay, now we don't use that design in this approach for two reasons. Number one, if we honestly believe that this programming is helpful, and certainly we do, because otherwise we would not engage in this, then it's arguably unethical not to, in other words, to purposely to create a control group that does not receive the benefits of this programming. So yes, there are other research designs, one known as a waitlist control design, but realistically speaking, we wanted beneficiaries to benefit. And so we're not going to deny access to these programs just so that we can rule out this relatively minor threat to internal validity. And so the other option is what we call within groups, or sometimes called within participants. And this is really where you measure change over time. So the baseline is participants' pre-test scores. And that's you administer a survey then, and you administer the survey at the end, and hopefully you see the change as a result of between those two time points. In our particular case, and anyone who's on this call might know, that's a very heavy lift, administering a same survey to the same participants twice. Okay, if you administer the same survey twice, but to different participants, guess what? That's actually a between groups design. It's not a within groups design. I mean, it's a within groups design masquerading as a between groups design. And the problem is not vernacular. The problem is statistical. Statistically speaking, between groups designs require almost 3 times the number of research participants to demonstrate equivalent effects. Because the beauty of this within groups design, or just to speak plainly, a pre-post design, the beauty of a true pre-post design is that the statistical techniques for analyzing that, also known as repeated measures designs, those are exponentially more powerful. Again, I'm saying about 3 times more powerful. In other words, you need about 1/3 the number of research participants. So that's why with our samples, I think we had, I don't recall at the top of my head, but we had something like 1,000 research participants. We achieved a whopping 100%. Oh, was that 4,000, Tim? Wow. Yes, we achieved a whopping 100% statistical power, which, by convention, we're happy if we get 80. So we had 100% statistical power, owing in part not only to a great data collection and willing partners, but because we used the within participants design, we used the pre-post design. That was a very lengthy way of saying the baseline with the pre-test score.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so very much for that. Yeah, Tim?
I was going to say, I mean, I think part of your question was also like related to the actual results, which obviously, as I say, evaluation forthcoming just after Christmas. So watch this space. But generally, I would say that they were very good. I mean, I think for the psychosocial resilience factors that we had investigated with in the most recent call, we're talking about usually like a 10 to 20% improvement, whether that's tolerance, perspective taking, sense of belonging, or whatever. For anything that's more, like behavioral, so all of the reporting, like the ability and the intention to report or to conduct bystander intervention, we're looking at actually even better improvements. That tends to be more about 20 to 30% improvement in this area. And as I say, we're really focused on the knowledge of how do you actually go about reporting X, Y, or Z, but as if not more importantly, are you going to do it? And what's your intentionality? What's your sense of self-efficacy? All these elements. So they were very strong results across sort of the whole range of outcomes, the 17 outcomes that we were measuring. But for the specific numbers, we'll save that for the evaluation report, which you will be able to read, and you can see for the last call in our call 2 evaluation report, which is on the Mayor of London's website.
Oh, brilliant! Thank you so much for that. Very much looking forward to that. The very last thing, I promise to make the last. When we talk about this lessons learned, you talk about for areas partnerships with the donors and also the evaluators. Obviously, utilizing and using theory of change in a more effective and efficient way, if I can say. utilizing shared data collection tools, which is really significant, and also empowering the civil society organizations. Perhaps one key phrase that I was missing from the lessons learned was the central place that the central place that should be given to the beneficiaries, to the end users. This idea of end users, or let's say the stakeholders, the very people on the ground who would use these programs and then try to benefit, and then the money would be aimed at empowering them. How did you involve them? Not just involve them, how did you engage with them? So when we talk about engagement, so it is just, let's say, a persistent communication, interaction, relationships, and also giving them the space and the platform to get their voices heard, and also to convey their messages. Is it something that I missed, or that was not part of the evaluation program, or your evaluation methodology, the inclusion of these beneficiaries and end users?
That's a wonderful question. Tim, did you understand the question?
I'll start and then you can. So I would say it's not a core focus for us, because it's another one of those issues which we somewhat bypass. I mean, obviously that is a very important thing and something that we are very conscious of, but it is something we're able to somewhat bypass, because the methodological approach that we've opted for, like as with all things in life, capacity and the amount of funding available tends to be the biggest controlling factor of any approach. And so our approach has often been that we filter through the grantees themselves, the organizations themselves. So we give data collection tools to the organizations. The organizations are responsible for administering and implementing them and dealing with that process. Now, those tools have an ability for, like some feedback from beneficiaries. Like they often add, like tell us about like a process element to this, which is outside of our evaluation remit, and a feedback element to this. But we didn't really want to take that relationship away from our grantees. We think it's important that, like that is something that they are taught how to do and something that they need to be almost in charge of. So we don't have such a large role in, in a relationship between us and end users, because that relationship is owned by the grantees themselves. And so that's why it doesn't really come up and sort of like as a main factor from our lessons learned from this evaluation, just because we've passed that along one step. Michael, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, my colleague Tim is typically humble and modest here in stating this. There was quite a bit of engagement between our research team, the evaluation team, and the grantees. For example, the first year that we deployed these, what we call the common measures, this suite of 17 measures, so we could aggregate the findings. This was new territory for grantees, and we didn't want them to be disturbed or feel like we were force feeding them, that they're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. We had a kickoff meeting. Tim, myself, we had a webinar basically to introduce them to not only the common measures themselves, but to the process that lay ahead. So we had that bit of handholding. But then, as mentioned, can you imagine if you were a grantee and you apply for funding, and then the funder says, okay, here's the 5 survey measure tools we insist that you dole out to your participants. You'd say, okay, well, let's see if this actually is applicable to, there'd be a lot of, I think, resistance there. So instead, although we had our common measures, we had our common menu of items, and based on their proposals, we knew with, let's just say, 75 to 90% certainty that we were parceling out the measures appropriately, at least per their stated intentions in their applications. Still, the good Tim Hulse had individualized meetings, web calls with each and every one of these 19 grantees to confer with them and to get changed. And if they had reason to doubt the applicability of one of these survey measures, fine, we were willing to entertain that. At the end of the day, we need everybody to have buy-in. We need everybody to feel like they are being respected, heard, and that the measurement tools are appropriate. And so we did that bit of, when I say we, it really means Tim, the good Tim, who has got great patience and great experience, and it's just wonderful at what he does. He took the time to do this. And of course, the first year that we did this, again, there was a lot of discussion to iron out consensus. But now, Tim, I think he would say that now it's almost the grantees welcome this, because now they don't have to stay up at night, fretting about how are we going to do M&E? How are we going to demonstrate our impacts? Instead, they know that they can rely upon one or more of the common measure survey items, that we are actually making life easier for them, not harder. And so, yes, there was quite a bit of hand-holding, and we build that into this day. Every iteration of the Shared Endeavour Fund, again, now in its 4th year, this is part of the process, where it's a consensus process between basically the Mayor's Office of Policing, the Mayor of London, vis-a-vis by way of the two of us, the evaluation team, to speak with them to make sure that we have tailored these suite of survey instruments appropriately to the program. Again, that was a bit lengthy, but there is that process, because we want to make sure that the M&E is tailor fit, even though we're using a standardized approach, that it's tailor fit to any given type of programming.
Thank you, Michael and Tim. Thank you so very much. So, apologies for asking too many questions, but I really enjoyed the presentation and also the conversations, and your answers have been really, really illuminating. Thank you so very much for that. Let's just check if I've got any questions from the audience. I think we haven't got any questions in chat box. Perhaps your presentation has been very comprehensive and resolved all the potential questions that the attendees might have had. But overall, it has been a brilliant session. Thank you both so much. Since we haven't got any particular questions from the audience, so how long did it take you to complete the evaluation of this program?
Oh, great, good question. Tim, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm just trying to I'm doing the mental arithmetic in my head. I would say it usually takes us about three. So I would say that the actual evaluation takes about 2 to 3 months. But obviously, this is government, so review processes. I would say it takes as long to get through government review processes as it does to do the evaluation itself, which obviously tends to slow things down a bit. Yeah, so I would say I think the evaluation itself takes about 2 to 3 months. So that obviously does create some problems for making sure, because these phases do run, almost consecutively, that there is not a very long gap between the end of one phase and the beginning of the next, to such a degree that our evaluation reports come out after the next phase has started. And that, goes back to that thing I said about strong partnerships, because if we had to wait for the evaluation report to be published, we would be giving recommendations, one phase after, and it would constantly be delayed. Yeah, so that's about it, probably.
And if I may add, the 3 months that Tim is describing, that's for basically the statistical analyses, the write-up of the report. But we also have some front end, as we mentioned, the M&E processes. There's a lot that's front loaded in this process. So the actual process is an annual process. So grantees are selected in, say, the fall of the year. They start collecting data, and then right around the end of spring, we are then provided with the data that we start to analyze. So really, it's an annual cycle. But to speak to the labor intense, if we could put all of the labor concurrently, yes, Tim's correct. We could compress it to within a 3-month, say, time frame. But it really bookends an 11 or 12-month process. Tim, is that safe to say?
Yeah, probably. I mean, if we were to include the beginning bit, probably more like 3 to 4 months. But yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Thank you both so very much. So, what do you think will happen to the findings and recommendations that you'll submit to the funder?
Would you repeat that, Arif? I just couldn't hear you very clearly.
What do you think will happen to the findings and the recommendations that you'll submit to the donor, to the mayor's office?
Oh, so I know what happens, actually. I can tell you that our recommendations for the current call have, for the most part, already been adopted.
Oh, brilliant. That is such a good news, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so for the first and second calls, I believe that they were all adopted. For this call, we have a couple of recommendations which haven't been adopted as of yet. But in fairness, because, as I say, because of this slightly awkward schedule with when we finish the evaluation compared with when the next fund started, I imagine that the remaining ones might well be adopted for the call 5, so the subsequent round starting in the latter half of 2024. Fingers crossed on that one. Actually, I don't want to say that will definitely happen and then be disappointed later. But no, I've tended to find that MOPAC, Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime, are very and the mayor themselves have been really supportive of all of our recommendations every year. And because it is such a collaborative process, we generally have a good, sense of where that's going and what the concerns are and what could be improved. And they've been so open and receptive and keen to, have this evidence-based approach from the get-go that that has really been a joy to work with them and do that, because it's they're always open to it.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much for that. As promised, that was my very last question. But thank you both once again for the fascinating talk and presentation. Good luck with everything you do. And we're very much looking forward to reading your report when it comes out in, let's say, January, hopefully.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you for having us.
Oh, no, thank you so very much for your contributions. And also, I don't really know whether you know quite a lot about this Indeed project or not. So we are developing an evaluation tool. So the tool is dedicated to helping and empowering first-line practitioners, policymakers, and a wide range of other stakeholders in planning, implementing, and utilizing evaluations with a particular reference to PV, CV, and broader crime prevention domains. So the project is coming to an end in August and September next year. The tool itself, or let's say the toolkit, because we've got a number of training modules as well, in terms training modules and e-guidebooks for a variety of end users. So these materials are, so the guidebooks are available now. They are open access at the moment. I don't know whether you have got them or not. If you want to have a look at them, so I'll be more than happy to send them over to you, so you can have a look at them. And then obviously, please feel free to circulate it around amongst your networks for use. The tool itself is not publicly available as yet, because we are in the process of testing and validating the tool to ensure that it contains all the features and all the requirements that we have listed from different stakeholders at different stages and life cycles of the project. So hopefully we will be able to make it publicly available by the end of the project, which is August and September. So you might keep an eye on the Indeed project and then see how its products can supplement your initiatives, your efforts, and also your work in the future.
We'll definitely do that. That sounds really interesting, and we look forward to reading those materials. Sorry, I'm sure Michael would have said the same thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so very much for that. So we've got another 10 minutes or so. Do you think you would like to continue talking about other works, or just you want to pop into a different session and then let's see what other people are doing around?
Yeah. I feel like we've come to a successful conclusion. Let's pivot to what comes next, or if people want to just take 8 minutes of their own time to what have you, catch some air, that's fine with me. I want to thank personally everybody who attended this session, and Atif, thank you very much for moderating this panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so very much. Thank you everybody who attended the session, and I'm very much looking forward to meeting you again somewhere and somehow. And let's stay in touch.
Very good. Have a good day.
Okay, Michael, and thank you so very much. Have a good one. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye now.